him doesn't fit into the. I'm not sure how many of us would be interested, but the chess match that was about to start was much anticipated. Many spectators were there, and even the television was there to see this match against two very up-and-coming chess players. Half an hour in, the board was full, only a few pieces had been taken, and one player frowned as he looked at the board. He spent 10 minutes staring at the board. He then stood, took the king in his hand and laid it down, the sign of accepting defeat. Everyone was surprised. Why did he resign? And so in the post-match interview that came, he was asked, so early in the game, why did you resign? He explained, well, I was in trouble and I looked at every move that I could possibly make, and all of them made the position worse. Defeat was inevitable. Perhaps you've never played chess and been in the position that he found himself in, but perhaps when you're playing Monopoly or some other board game with the family, you felt something was the same. You're in trouble. Every possible move, everything that could possibly happen next, only made matters worse. Worse still, perhaps you've found this in a real life situation. You've got into a situation, and however you look at it, there is no way out. Things can only get worse. Of course, as a Christian, you know you should never feel like that. And yet you do. And we may have to deal with other people who feel like that too. The clue that Peter, even Peter, felt like that comes in our reading. When this wonderful thing was happening, Peter had no idea that what was happening was real. He had no idea that it was real. So let's go back and just look at what Peter's situation was. He'd been with Jesus for 3 years, and then for 6 weeks after the resurrection, where Jesus had spoken to him personally, taken him aside, and told him what a massive task he had before him, the job that Jesus wanted him to do. Go back and read just before where we get to this chapter. I was very pleased when I got this chapter, one of my favourite stories in the New Testament. And when David asked me to preach and said, can you do Peter, miraculous escape from prison, I was very glad. It's a wonderful story. Jesus, God isn't mentioned in it at all, and yet he's through it all. And it tells us a lot about us and the church as well. So go back to Peter. He had performed miracles. He had preached sermons that saved thousands. When the temple priests arrested him and put him in jail together with John, he was miraculously released and was back preaching in the temple. He raised Dorcas or Tabitha from the dead. God had treated him so wonderfully, even over the past few weeks. And yet, he doubted that God could get him out of the mess that he was now in. So what had changed? The Jewish leaders and King Herod did not have any great love for each other, but it was expedient for them to work together. The Jews had tried to suppress the Christian church, the disciples, this new way, and had failed. The disciples were preaching. People were coming to be saved. The Jews were really worried about this, and they needed to really persecute the Christians in a far more detailed way, and they needed Herod's help to do this. Now, they didn't recognize Herod. He was only part Jewish, and part Jewish, he's not Jewish at all to the Orthodox Jews. But Herod was needed, and so they made this unholy alliance and persuaded Herod to help persecute the Jews, persecute the church. And so he arrested a few people, including one of the top three, James, the brother of John, one of those three disciples really close to Jesus, and had him put to death. He awaited the reaction, and he thought, this is good. Everybody's on my side on this. This is giving me some really good support all round. And so he went for the next. He went for Peter. He arrested Peter and put him in prison. Now, he probably heard too that Peter had escaped from prison earlier, and he was going to make sure that didn't happen again. So instead of being in a holding cell, as we'd call today, he was put in what we'd call a Category A prison, a Roman prison. Even there, the security was increased. Instead of the normal 4 guards, he allocated 8. Instead of having been chained to 1 guard, he chained him to 2. Instead of having the guards on duty for half the night, he reduced it and he put more guards on so there was no danger of them falling asleep. The situation was bad. But as we saw, Peter was not sure about his position. And just like the man at the chess, he would have sat in the prison and he would have said, the situation is perilous. As soon as the Passover is over, I'm going to be mock tried and executed, just like my friend James had been recently. He looked at every option and it was worse. And he was laying in prison. All the things that God had done, all the promises that God had made, this great man of God, Peter, when God intervened, didn't recognize what was happening. He doubted. Now, most of us know the story of Peter when he was there, and I think it's fair to say that Peter was a man who blew hot and cold. So is this just something that Peter struggled with? As I said, it would be good to go back and just read the bit leading up to Peter to see all the good things that God had done. But for your homework, I'll also give you a little session out of the first book of Kings. And we'll look at the story of Elijah. Elijah was another Bible giant. He was God's chosen prophet, not just the prophet of his time, but regarded as the most senior of the prophets. He was even recalled into the transfiguration to be with Jesus on the mount, to represent the whole prophets of the Old Testament. He performed miracles. He went up against Ahab and Jezebel, who were leading the people of Israel astray and away from God. He predicted a long drought. and was then had to be kept safe. The ravens fed him. He went to the widow in Zarephath, where God miraculously fed him. He raised the dead. He challenged the priests, 450 priests of Baal. He called down fire from heaven. He preached to the people who turned back to God. And then, when Queen Jezebel heard what had happened, she said, "I'm going to get you, Elijah." And he ran away and hid. So there we see the comparison. Two great people of the Bible, people who ought to have trusted God totally with all that God had done for them, all that God had promised, and yet they came to a situation in their lives where they doubted. Both chosen by God, both performed miracles, both raised the dead in his name, both delivered from the enemy, and both doubted. For those with good eyesight, the spoiler alert comes on the bottom. Because although they doubted God, God was true to his promises. Because God keeps his promises, and to each he sent an angel. An angel came to what was needed. This was not the end that they had anticipated. Elijah prayed to die. Peter expected to be executed. This was not the end. This was a new beginning given by God. God surprised them. After all that he'd done, God still surprises with his love and his wonder. You go on one. You go on one for me there. Oh no, back one, sorry. Not only did God surprise them, he recommissioned them. Even the people that failed, the people that doubted. An angel came. God showed there was an option X that they never got to. That God would act, that God would surprise. So the second half of the chapter comes to the church. And we look at the church and we read that the church was praying earnestly at this time. So there was trouble. And what did the church do? They came together. Very good. They prayed. Very good. They prayed earnestly. A strange word, isn't it? Earnestly, not one of the words we use. I think you could almost say they prayed desperately. You know, when people get to the situation where they don't see option X and they pray almost in desperation, if you'll do this, God, I'll do anything. That's the sort of prayer that the church was having to come to. They were even praying all night. You'll notice that they were praying when Peter, rescued from prison in the middle of the night, came to the house and knocked on the door, and they were still praying. Very good. What a great thing the early church was. And then what happened? Rhoda came knocking at the door and saying, "It's great, your prayers have been answered. Peter is outside." And they said, no, they didn't say hallelujah. They said, "You must be mad." They've been praying earnestly all night. God answers their prayer, and they said, "It can't possibly be. It can't possibly be. You must be mad. It must be his angel. Eventually, when they were proved wrong, they were astonished. So here we have, the church was afraid. The church prayed earnestly into the night. And I almost said to Rhoda, don't interrupt us, telling us that God has done something. We're having a prayer meeting here. I think sometimes that can be a lesson for the church. How often has God answered prayers? And all it needs is for us to respond to God, to get up and go. Go and see what God has done. Go and do what God is asking. Remember when Peter and John healed the man who had been lame? They said, you're healed. He was healed, and he was still sitting there. And they pulled him to his feet. I think sometimes when God answers our prayer, that's what we need to do. We need to act, not just keep praying. What they did was good. What they did was very good. What God did was even better. So what have we learned this morning? Probably the best sermon you've heard was in the hymn we sang just before I started. Charles Wesley's recognition that every person is in a prison of sin, of guilt, of separation from God. And there's nothing that we could have done about it, but God has done something. God comes, breaks the chains, opens the doors, and leads us all to a new life. And even when we despair, God has reminded us that he is a great God. Even the greatest have their doubts. Peter, Elijah. But even in our doubts, God is working. And when God has answered, we need to get up and go. Having stepped away from the tunes you will recognise to sing the great Charles Wesley hymn, we're now going to finish with another with a tune borrowed from elsewhere. Some may think this is a Christmas song, but I've chosen it for 3 reasons. One is it fits to a tune of another. 2, it's one of my favourite songs. And 3 is the message at the end of each verse is exactly what we've learnt today. God surprises earth with heaven, coming here on Christmas Day. We sing, shepherds watch and wise men wonder.